welcome back to Mad About Cards and Crafts and another Brutus Monroe Design Team project. Today we're creating this A2 size card featuring the Evergreen Builder and the Birdhouse Builder. I'm going to add a little bit of whimsy to this card. I have a piece of watercolor paper that's cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. It's dry, there's no water on it, and I'm spritzing on some Chroma mist. The first color was Bumblebee yellow and the second was the Tangerine orange. I added a little bit of water. It wasn't enough, so I'm spritzing it with a little bit more. I'm still not quite getting the movement that I want. I'm going to tilt this, and when I tilt the card, I actually end up blending it a little bit more than what I was looking for. So there I spritzed it with a little more Bumblebee. Here I'm adding a little bit more of that Tangerine orange. I love the water spots that I have on this card panel now, and I'm simply going to dry it with my Ranger heat tool to speed things along. Once I get this dried, I'm going to bring in a Lawn Fawn stencil. This is a 2-piece stencil. It's a set of leaves, and I'm going to do some stenciling. One of the ways that you can add whimsy to your card is to add stenciling. I particularly love to add stenciling in natural stencils, so things like leaves and flowers. Like little tiny flowers would have been really pretty and would really create that playful whimsy feel. I'm adding some Distress ink. I've chosen to go with Distress ink because it is a little bit deeper, a little bit more vibrant, and I wanted to add Rusty Hinge, and I'm going to add for the second layer Vintage Photo. This is going to tone down the background, so the yellow and the orange is pretty vibrant. But when you add these other two tones, it's really going to kind of take it back just a little bit and give it a little bit more of that rustic feel, which is what I was looking for. I thought that the Evergreen Builder die, because it is a plain tree, it's really cute if you were to use pattern paper with it. I've used it with some glitter cardstock, but I really love the idea of adding that texture with the stenciling. And so I think that this touch of whimsy really brought this die to life. So here is the Evergreen Builder. There are 3 dies in this set. There's a large, medium, and small. I'm going to use as many of the dies as I can get on this panel. I'm also going to use this panel off camera to cut out the bird from the Birdhouse Builder. So the bird that I'm going to use on my card will also have this same whimsical pattern on it, which is going to bring even more cohesiveness to my card design. To add some more depth and dimension to these trees, I'm adding some Vintage Photo. Again, that's going to tone things down just a little bit and draw out the colors from the Chroma mist. Here is that bird. I did add a bit of dimension to the wing, so I took a small piece of double-sided foam tape and I put the wing down, popping it up for that little bit of dimension. Once I get a hold of this little beak for the bird, I'm going to add that. And then I'm also going to add the eye. Now there are feet that go along with this. On the left-hand side, you can see the die set and how many dies actually come in this set, which is fabulous. But I'm going to use the smaller branch. So there's 2 branches in that set. I'm going to use the smaller one on my card design today. For the trees, I wanted to add a little bit more texture to my card, and I'm adding some jute twine from my stash around the base of the trunk. So I've done that to both the large and the medium tree. I've decided to use only 2 trees on my design. I'm using some Copic colors in, I believe I'm using E29 right here for the feet and for the eye, and then I use a Y marker for the bill. For the branch, I did use some craft cardstock. I have a wood grain embossing folders to add even more texture to that branch. And then I'm using the vintage photo that was left on my brush and adding that to the branch as well. As you can see, I do have a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch top folding card base. This is kind of like a rust color, and I'm adding that vintage photo through this flower burst stencil. I adore this flower burst stencil. I've mentioned this many times. It's one of my favorites. I think that it adds just so much interest and texture to skies. So it tends to be one of my go-tos. I used a hillside border and I used some very inexpensive paper. You're going to see that it's very thin paper. So you're going to see that it's going to lift up and it's going to crease, and I'll struggle with it a little bit, but I wanted to add a touch of color to it. And so I have the crushed olive distress ink. Once I get this crushed olive down, which you can see it really does add to those hillsides, and I'm going to add the forest moss around the edges, and that'll give it a 3-tone look. Now it will go down on the paper and you won't see all of those wrinkles. It'll be just fine, so I'm not so worried about that. I'm going to layer both of the hillsides onto the card, and I'm going to dry fit where I want all of my items to be. Once I get it dry fitted, I'm going to bring in a sentiment from the Grateful Greetings stamp set. This is going to say grateful for you. I am going to do some heat embossing. With these color tones, I really love gold embossing powder. So I am using the Brutus Monroe Gilded Embossing Powder to add my sentiment. I have it where I would like it. I'm going to close my MISTI door, bring in the Brutus Monroe clear embossing ink, and I'm going to ink up my stamp and I'll stamp it down. I'll use a coffee filter to catch any of the stray embossing powder. As you can see, I did use my anti-static tool. I'm pretty heavy-handed with that. And I am going to have to come back in with my stencil, which is super easy to line up, and I am going to re-stencil that area. I do wipe it down once I heat emboss it, but I do need to just add a little bit more of the stenciling, that vintage photos, to make sure that I have that depth of color in the background that I was looking for. As you can see, it's pretty toned down using that anti-static tool. So here's layer number 1. You'll notice that it's hanging over the edge. I did only glue the bottom portion of that hill because I do need to bring in the second one. And I'm going to tuck that second one down behind. First, I'm cutting off any of the excess. And here's where I tuck this in. And I'll trim that off as well. I love the color combination together. I think that it works so well. I love the richness of this. There was a little bit where I missed aligning the hills, and all I did was just trim off that little bit of a piece. Here's where I'm just adding a little bit more of that vintage photo to my background, and I like that so much better. So I need to figure out where I want my branch. These trees, I end up moving them. So you're going to see that I have them up a little bit high, and I decide that I want them to be just a little bit lower. But first I'm going to remove the foam tape adhesive. So I am popping up both my large and my medium evergreen tree. And I'll place it down. I'm making sure that the right tree isn't hanging over the edge because I don't want to trim that off. And so they're pretty high right there. And I just end up, after looking at it for a few minutes, I do end up at the end of the video just realigning them down a little bit lower. Because that wing is popped up on the bird, I'm not adding any more foam tape to the bird. And I'm going to trim off the edge of that branch. Once I get this trimmed off, I am going to, as I said, realign my trees, and that's going to be my card for today. So just kind of keep in mind when you're working with solid dies and they look kind of plain, think about the different types of stenciling that you can add to it to create more interest and texture, to add a theme. I think that this whimsical feel for fall was perfect for this particular card. I could go with a chevron pattern, and that would give me more of a modern look. But I love the way that this came together. I'm going to add some jute bows to my tree, and that's it for me today. So thank you so much for watching. Until next time, have a fabulous day.